Здравейте отново.
Hello again. Over the next half an hour with my panelists, we're going to talk about how Bulgaria could achieve the ever higher goals, decarbonizational goals of the EU. Also, the substantial wind and solar potential of our country could position it as an important energy source from will we be able to utilize our natural endowments and turn them into a competitive advantage? This is what we're going to speak about. We have people from the legislative branch. They're working on a reform in order to put the energy transition on a secure footing, and also representatives of the energy distribution companies also working towards the sustainable transition. Vladimir Tabutov is a member of the Energy Commission in Parliament. Vladislav Panev, a member of the Energy Commission in the Parliament. Again, Angelin, Tsachev, we know him. He's the executive director of the systemic operator. Georgiev is the executive director of the National Electric Company. Mr. Tabutov, the last panel told us that Bulgaria is running late in transposing the EU law into the local one, and the Repower Europe plan provides opportunities for reform, which will facilitate the conditions in Europe to maximum 2 years to introduce new power stations. That's the term it provides for. What are the plans of the ruling coalition? Thanks for your invitation. Thank you for coming. From legal perspective, there's quite a lot to be done by the lawmakers, and in our coalition, we are united behind this, behind the idea that over the next few months, we should transpose the EU directives. We've got 9 penal procedures in the energy production sector, and we have some additional burden as lawmakers in our attempts to transpose the new provisions. We are short of quite a few provisions. We're aware of that, and we know that they have to be a part of our regulations here. They will facilitate investments in hydrogen, in storage systems, in agro photovoltaics, in floating power stations. We're lagging far behind, and all the members of the Energy Commission in Parliament, we are keenly aware that we'll have hectic 3 or 4 months ahead. And on top of that, we've got objectives which are related to the recovery and resiliency plan. These 22 legal amendments which are pending in order to be able to use the funds under the resiliency plan. That's quite a heavy legislative process, and hopefully we'll do it as fast and effectively as possible. Mr. Panev, anything else to say on legal initiatives? There was a mention about how northern Greece has panels on top of houses. Germany also has panels on top of their houses. It is not the size of subsidies, but the Bulgarian regulations, which people cannot understand. And those who are ready to install panels have these unclear provisions. It's much easier for big businesses Last week, we adopted some amendments in order to facilitate renewables for individual needs, for households. When I talk to captains of industry, everyone is bent on investing in energy production. It's much cheaper than relying on the energy market at the moment, the way it is at the moment. If the cost for energy from photovoltaics, if you have a good economy of scale, is multiple times cheaper than the market price of electrical energy. And this will be a permanent trend by me. And so as lawmakers, we have to facilitate investment in renewables, not only photovoltaics, wind, offshore. We have to create the legal framework so that procedures are easier to understand and apply for everyone, energy production for everybody, so to speak. Bulgaria, that would make Bulgaria more independent, that would make households more independent, and our companies will be more competitive on international markets. This is our priority. Our economy can only function based on a competitive energy sector. The recovery plan, the bottleneck in it is the investment in power transition system, in the power grid. This kind of investment in electrical distribution company would put in place the infrastructure to put investment on top, investment in renewables. The recovery plan will give us the money for private investment if our legislative framework is liberal enough, and if we have a good quality grid to take them on. This permission regime is a problem for investors in order to invest more in the sector. The business community is ready to cooperate with the lawmakers in order to put some new facilities in place. Joining the grids and new energy products, from your perspective, from your planning, it's pretty much up to your planning what we can achieve in terms of new capacity. How do you see the development of the country's energy mix over the next 10 years? And what plans do you have when it comes to investing in the grid in order to be able to add new capacity? The preliminary contracts for joining the grids, and what do you think about it? My thanks to the organizers first. It is vital to have gatherings of this kind. We're living in hectic times, and this transition is quite intense, and all those new things that invade our lives, penetrate our lives, including renewables, are pretty murky for some people. So increasing publicity will give us ease and comfort, because green energy is not something which should be perceived as daunting. There's no alternative to it, and over the next 20 or 30 years, it will be the core of all investment in energy, and Bulgaria as a member state will be will keep stride with everybody else, with all other member states. You said something interesting, yes. Last week we got news that more than 20 megawatt worth of new facilities have been applied for as 18,600 applications in the high voltage grids. We're not talking about the potential of the Maritsa Basin and the other territories in former mines, etc. You understand that the national potential to produce from renewables is very high. It needs to be utilized, and if we want to have sustainable economy, we need to utilize this potential to the full. But it can only be utilized if parallel with the renewables technologies, we also develop the other two pillars in energy production, which will make it adequate and its supply secure. This is storage secure, storage facilities and non-emission basic facilities. We have to be frank, without storage system and without zero emission basic facilities, core facilities, we cannot retain the adequacy of our system. We have already built a good electrical system, but also a well-balanced energy mix. We have no issues in terms of adequacy, and it is 99.99996%, which means we can only have problems within 4 hours a year. Unfortunately, in quite a few EU member states, this adequacy, with the introduction of a great amount of renewables, is being undermined. The last blackout in Bulgaria was back in 1978 when I was 3. In the UK, they had 2 blackouts last year. So we have to be aware what the consequences are of imprudent policies and the taking up of a huge amount of new facilities without securing the rest of the system, and how we should develop the grid as a whole. This is why I said that the renewables have no alternative. We need to have them integrated. We need to build them up as fast as possible, but we need to do the other investments in storage systems, like pumping stations, hydrogen production, the batteries, of course, they have their rightful place in the whole system. Last but not least, those zero emission basic facilities, which is the further development of nuclear power production in our region. The correct thing to do is to see the regions separately, individually, because each sub-region has its own specifics. We cannot just mechanically borrow models from Denmark or from Norway or from Germany. The Baltic countries and the North Sea countries, they've got their own pluses geographically. We've got our own advantages. They've got more wind, 5,000–6,000 hours a year. We've got more sun down here. And Europe wishes to utilize all the potential of renewables, and this can easier be done with this intersystemic connectivity. We need to have enough capacity to transport the energy produced in the south to the north, to the west, and the other way around, the energy produced around the Baltic and the North Sea to make its way down south when we need this energy. This is the right way to do it, and we'll have the least amount of losses and the highest degree of utilization of renewables. In terms of the grid development, I'll say a few things. It is crucial to develop our grid in a planned way, together with the projects for facilities. But frankly, we cannot plan the development of our grid because we lack security and we do not have enough information about what new facilities will be put in place. Only for 18 months from February 2021 up until now, the country saw preliminary contracts being signed for 4,000 megawatts worth of new facilities. But how much of these were implemented? The cycle is quite long. I tell you, up until now, what we've got, big parks, there's 2 of them in the pipeline being built at the moment. 2 or 3 projects are running at the moment. This is medium voltage network, some small ones as well. So all these 1,800 megawatts, which are underpinned by contracts, medium voltage contracts. They've got contracts with the distribution companies, but 80 or 90% are going to be made available over the next 2 or 3 years. However, the big projects have a problem, and it comes from we as distribution operator, as a transition operator, we haven't put in place the necessary infrastructure. So these are 2 things which should go together. If we plan along with potential investors, these 2 processes can run in parallel, and we can strongly reduce the time to introduce new facilities. Otherwise, if we fail to do it, they will do parceling plans, they will have permission to build, and they will come to us to sign their contracts. And this is only at this point we will start our planning. Otherwise, we have no security that these projects will be put in place, will materialize. And we, as the operator, spending public money, we cannot afford to walk in this direction, to spend this money when we have no warranties that this is going to take place. Our colleagues from the Energy Commission in Parliament know this. We have discussed it several times. Incidentally, I have already discussed this with several energy commissions. It was back in January 2021 when we made our proposal for the first time to amend the Renewable Sources Act. And through this amendment, we want to introduce better security and planning for the electric grid. And what it boils down to is our proposal is to be able to make the calls, tenders so that the distribution companies and the operator come up with regional solutions for the grid. And these regional solutions will encompass all the intent to join the grid per region. Based on my experience, although we didn't have these amendments in place, we have already made we have had two discussions with potential investors in the Northeast and in the South as well. And the outcome in terms of cost of joining the grid of these investors were very good. So I think this approach to uniting the future producers and the grid development, and that will give security to both the operator and the distribution companies, and it will bring down their costs substantially. So the faster we do this, we do our legal framework amendments, the faster we'll be able to integrate renewables in our grid. As it was mentioned by the policymakers who spoke, it will reduce our dependency on countries who have huge resources of minerals. It isn't so worrying that within 18 months only 2 contracts were signed, because I know that from the perspective of investors it takes quite long to accumulate capital. On the other hand, you're concerned that there's no security in terms of what will materialize is not shared by investors, because it accumulates potential in the grid, and future potential investors can utilize this potential. The regulations should be focused on being able to sift out serious investors because we would like to speed up the integration of genuine investors, robust investors. We're ready as investors, and the lawmakers are ready to start our discussions, because this is something to be addressed. I hand over to Mr. Georgiev, to talk about balancing and the national electrical company's role in this balancing process, the balancing of renewable energy and the cost for existing and new projects in Bulgaria. Historically, Bulgarian projects have very high balancing costs, much higher than anywhere else in Europe, and this takes away into our competitive edge that we have from the wind and solar that we've got. How, with these big hydroelectric stations, how do you see this?
First of all, I'd like to congratulate the organizers for this event. It is very important to focus on these topics. It is good to see different viewpoints, the point of the legislator, the market participants, consumers, investors, and I hope this good dialogue, this sincere dialogue will continue. We hear sometimes conflicting opinions, but it's very important to hear all opinions. From the viewpoint of the National Power Company, let me say that we are one of the largest generators of power in Bulgaria, and we understand clearly our role, our responsibility to the society, to the power sector, the green transition, and support for new investment in renewable sources. The National Power Company is also the largest renewable energy generator. So we belong to the same team. The problems are identical for all of us. We begin with 2,700 megawatt, then the pump storage is there as well. Annually, we have 5.3 terawatt hours of power generated annually. There are about 40 dams. The hydropower aggregates are nearly 90 in number. So this, of course, requires a lot of expertise, a lot of responsibility in managing all that. Before I go to the essence of your question, let me mention that unfortunately, the National Power Company does not have the freedom to use the hydro resources the way we wish to, because the dams provide drinking water and water for irrigation as well. So we are rather restricted in by the Ministry of the Environment and Waters on the amounts and the dynamic of using water. So this is what restricts our ability to use these facilities for energy purposes and, of course, driven by market forces. Something else I need to mention is that I see in the National Power Company that in many of the facilities, the required investment has not been made, the required maintenance and rehabilitation has not been carried out in order to make sure that they operate without fail. Some of the rehabilitation is going on, but we are suffering substantial delays. Probably most of you are familiar with the situation in the Chaira facility, a huge problem not only for the energy sector, not only for Bulgaria, but for the entire region of Southeastern Europe, because this is a very important balancing facility. We are making every effort possible. We get support from the highest government level to find a technical solution to deal with the problems at Chaira as quickly as possible. My background is into power trading, and of course we cooperate with renewable generators. We are familiar with the problems, with the challenges they're faced with. We have a vision as to how the national power company can best use its resource. To put it in a nutshell, with flexible capacity and given all the restrictions I just mentioned, the national power company has a very important role to play. That is to provide a physical balance in the system and also once the pump storage Chaira is back online, to find a balancing approach to pricing in this country. All investors are well familiar and are also quite frightened by what we call the risk of cannibalism, that is launching very large facilities in the same area, be it photovoltaic or wind generators where the resources would be similar. So this is a very important function for the national power company. And we will make every effort to support the energy transition and indirectly to support investors in renewable energy. Naturally, we also review possibilities to invest in renewables, both in the technology and in the locations where the power company has a competitive advantage. Today, floating facilities were mentioned. We are the owner of large water basins. And when we have this body of water, we could analyze and potentially invest into such floating facilities. Another competitive advantage we have is that balancing would be made more local, more flexible, faster, and more functional. Thank you for your presentations. It was interesting to hear the new position of the National Power Company on the energy transition and their involvement. Mr. Panev and Mr. Tabutov, I wanted us to discuss a topic which is not publicly debated, but I understand that there are some ideas. I think this would be a win-win solution in the current situation. Namely, to think of such contracts for the new renewable generators, which would allow the country to get cheap green energy, and the investors would be able to sell their energy and thus speed up the possibilities to fund their projects, and thus projects would be launched much faster. Thus, the investors would not need to think of how they sell their energy and respectively get enough funding for their projects. What do you think about that? It's an interesting discussion and has to do with the new segments of the energy exchange, which we have been discussing for a long time. Long-term contracts, including for renewable, is a good idea. It would give the investors some long-term profit. The PPA are a good example. Until last year, they were concluded at levels much below the current level in the market. So the contracts were with large consumers or with the government, and that would be beneficial to both parties, both the seller and the power. The buyer, be it the government or a private buyer, would make sure that they get power on a long-term basis, let's say 10 years, at the price levels below the current market ones, and it would guarantee a good rate of return for the investors in renewables. This would speed up investment in renewables despite the problems of the grid. I'd like to respond to Mr. Tsachev. To me, this is a chicken and egg story, whether the network should be ready to take up a larger load first and then build the facilities, the renewables, or whether they should be at a rather advanced stage. Currently, they're about 20,000 megawatt on projects, but some of them are speculative. I wouldn't call speculative a dirty word. After all, this is what gives support to the market, some kind of predictability. So these ideas should perhaps be charged. These proposed investments, if they were charged, would support the serious project. But there are others which aim at selling a project to a potential investor, but the investor is still not there. But yes, these are ways to make the market develop. Mr. Tabutov, would you like to add something? Yes, indeed, we have talked about legislative changes in this context. But let me say the main goal of Parliament is to come up with sustainable changes in the long term, which would address all the problems mentioned earlier on. Let's say shortening the period for the development of certain projects would result in nothing else but more chaos for Mr. Tsachev to deal with, unless we deal with the problems that he mentioned. So it's all interconnected, if you wish. And if we don't provide a solution to all the issues, the final result will not be favorable. There will be a larger number of projects. Fewer would be truly implemented at a higher cost. So what is coming in terms of legislative changes or legislative initiative is quite complex, but we will try within the next 6 months to come up with something which will truly work. And we are, so to say, the hostage, in the best sense of the word, of legislative initiatives of the Resilience and Recovery Plan and Repower EU. Thank you, Mr. Tsachev. You already answered some of the questions. But another question that it's, in my view, important to talk about is whether the modernization of the network would be using some of the funding from the EU in order to integrate more of the power. Then the digitalization system for the transmission network will allow increasing the capacity. So is the system operator already working on this project? Yes, it is already on digitalization of the grid. In February 2021, we started doing it. This was the time when we got the first approvals of the project by the European Union. So by now, over 50 million lev have been invested in digitalizing the network. The automated management of substations in the country is going on. Over 150 out of the 250 substations, 256 substations, are being automatically managed. So the whole process on medium voltage is already in place. So in all 110 to 220 kilowatt stations will be completed by the end of 24. This is the timeline. As you know, according to the plans, the final deadline is 26, but our own schedule is more ambitious. We want to truly encourage and take up all these contracts on the medium voltage, in the medium voltage network, because these projects will be implemented there fastest when it comes to renewables. The goals in the plan stipulate that we would allow over 4,500 megawatt to be connected. We already have contracts in place for 4,000 megawatt, and we are actually ahead of time when it comes to the speed, to the tempo of implementing the goals. Other goals we should meet through the National Plan for Resilience and Recovery is increasing the capacity by 2,000 megawatt. And we are making good progress there for cross-border transactions. Bulgaria has already implemented the goal for the cross-border power lines between Bulgaria and Greece. 122 kilometers have already been implemented. And then we expect the Greek operator to do the same until the end of 23. At least this is what the Greek party has assured us. Of. Other activities within the Resilience and Recovery Plan are new SCADA systems for the central dispatch and regional dispatch. The technical requirements are now being prepared, and the new systems would be in place by 26. We also are planning a new market system, which will replace the existing one and allow us to implement all market changes. They are taking place right now, these market changes. So everything that is being planned in Europe and which will make us part and parcel of the common power market in Europe will be done by us, and by 26 it will all be in place. As far as the goals are concerned, there will be no problem in implementing them. Yes, the power system operator has already implemented 450 kilometers of 400 kilovolt power lines. These power lines were funded through the Connected Europe mechanism, and at present we have 2 new projects. On the 10th of May, we filed in our application to take part in 2 new inter-system projects. We want to develop the grid further and be able to connect more renewable facilities. The projects are joint project, Bulgarian, Romanian, Bulgarian, Greece. That's why there are 2, one in the northern part of the country, connecting the grid to the Republic of Romania, the other one in the south, connecting the grid to the Republic of Greece. And the projects involve developing the networks respectively in the northern and southern part of the country. And by the end of the year, we expect these projects to be regarded as projects of common European interest. So far, we don't have much information on that, but we hope that this is what is coming. There is government support, the Ministry of Energy in the Republic of Bulgaria and the Ministry of Energy in the republics of Greece and Romania, respectively. So we can be pretty certain that these projects would acquire such a status, and then we would be able to apply for funding on the different facilities of the European Commission. Again, let me repeat, the whole goal of these projects is support to potential investors in renewable energy and connecting these generators to the grid. Thank you, Mr. Georgiev. It was interesting to me, and I'm sure to the audience it was interesting as well to hear that the National Power Company has specific investment intentions in renewables. Can you tell us what's already public? We are still at the time when ideas are being discussed. I cannot be more specific than that. Once again, let me repeat, we are looking at the areas where the National Power Company has a competitive advantage. And this is the way to go forward. If you have competitive advantage, have more competence, be more efficient than others, we would utilize that. What I did not mention in my answer to your previous question was the following. One of the initiatives within the National Power Company is to improve the possibilities for integration of unpredictable generators. There's a project to expand, to enlarge the water in Chaira by building another dam, the Yadenica Dam. This is a pretty old project. It was put on hold, and now the efficiency is being calculated and its impact on the green transition. We work very actively on this project at the moment, but this is something which will allow larger amount of water to use to balance Chaira and allow for more fluctuations in the energy system to be dealt with. Yes, this is important indeed. Yadenica has been a project which has been on the table, so to say, for more than 10 years, and it's good to hear that it's in the priorities of the National Power Company. We are already running behind time. Nicola seems to have a question. Let's give the floor to the audience. Of course, a very quick question addressed to Mr. Tsachev and Mr. Georgiev, and please be concise in your response. Greece has installed 1 gigawatt of renewable facility last year, 3 probably this year, and about 40 gigawatt is already in place. In Bulgaria, there have been requests for about 20. In Romania, there are 30. How are we going to manage the system, Mr. Tsachev? Are there going to be challenges there? And Mr. Georgiev, in view of what's going on at the moment, the dynamic, cannibalization or high energy tariffs in the region? The challenge is huge. The challenge is huge, and that is why I mentioned earlier that alongside the development of renewable capacity in order to make the most of its potential, the member states must do what it takes to create an environment to build up storage facilities. Here I mean pump storage, hydrogen. And it's very important to develop the whole network at the EU level so that the energy generated here could in real time be used where needed. Western Europe and vice versa, from Western Europe energy to reach the entire southeastern region, southeastern area of the continent. This is very important indeed. A fortnight ago, we, as a transmission, as a grid operator, raised the question within the task force set up by the European Commission in the southeastern region. So we clearly stated that the common project needs to be implemented at the EU level in order to build a new grid, to build new infrastructure, which will increase the capacity to exchange power among the individual member states. At present, one can very clearly see the bottlenecks and how Europe is split in two, the southeastern from Hungary to Greece and northwestern, the rest of the member states. The bottleneck is between Austria, Hungary and Slovakia, and it is quite obvious. Anyone who follows the daily fluctuations of the power tariffs can see this. It's a huge problem. It has been raised on a number of occasions. We must deal with the connectivity of these countries. So what if Bulgaria and Romania and Bulgaria and Greece can improve their connectivity? That wouldn't bring about anything. So long as there is not a common European solution to this issue, the energy generated here will stay here. In order to be used, to be utilized, it will have to be transformed into hydrogen, because there's no other realistic solution for this energy to leave this region. That's all I can say. Mr. Georgiev, I'll begin from the end. Of course, there will be cannibalization, and it will regulate investment or channel investment into different technologies, and then investments will go down in certain areas where cannibalization is most prominent. Of course, we expect cannibalization to increase investment in storage technologies, because this is the key solution we need. The strongest instrument, in my view, as we heard from Mr. Tsachev as well, is good connectivity and creating a single energy market without bottlenecks, so that we would be able to allow power to move around and deal with the local specifics, improve integration, bring down cannibalization. What we expect is more tariff fluctuation, both on a seasonal basis and within the profile of a single day. We see this already, but probably this trend will become more prominent. And of course, the national power company will make indeed every effort to decrease cannibalization, to keep the generating facilities in good technical repair, to improve facilities where possible, and manage the commercial aspect of the system in the best possible way. Thank you. I see there's another question from Mr. Hinkov. My name is Anatoly Linkov. We have been into wind and solar projects since 2008, and we work not only in Bulgaria, but in many other EU member states. Therefore, my question is to all participants. I fully agree with Mr. Tsachev. What we all need, the government, ESO, and the regulator, is stability. And stability needs legislative changes. So the two key issues discussed on this panel were the connection and the storage. According to many colleagues and myself, working on renewable projects, we all see a major fault in the current legal framework. When we develop projects, we get the permit to connect 2 or 3 years later. And by then we have made huge investments and there is a lot of unpredictability. We don't know what's going on in the grid. And the system operator doesn't know whether these projects are going to be implemented. Investors complain of ESO, ESO complains of the investors. This is a catch-22 and doesn't help anybody. Therefore, from the legislative representatives of the panel, have you considered the possibility, the connection to be the last point in a project, but to become the requirement upfront? Any investor who has some intentions, who provides, let's say, some bank guarantee or something, to thus give some guarantees that this investment is seriously considered. And then the investor would be given certain conditions for connecting to the grid, but this would be given for a limited period of time, 36 months or 60 months, which is quite long. But once this preliminary contract is concluded, to get some advance payment and thus allow the investor to implement their plans and thus avoid the catch-22. For the my other question concerning the legislative part. For 15 years, Nikki, we have been waiting. Only Mr. Todorov is not here, otherwise we all would have been very happy. I may ask questions, and may I not? Is it possible to consider some legislative limitation, not only vis-a-vis the investors, but also vis-a-vis the institutions for their reaction, because this is another problem? Then did you consider hybrid projects? Because there is one profile when you generate solar energy, and the wind profile is different. And in many countries, the connection point with the same nominal power allows for different generators to be connected to the grid, and this comes as the opportunity to reach a balance. To Mr. Tsachev, my first question is more general. We heard that 18,600 megawatt are the applications filed, but we don't know what the real capacity of the grid is. How much can the grid take from solar and wind energy? Do you differentiate between the two? Because this is a very important aspect. There is a lot of difference in projects for wind and solar energy respectively. So do you make some distinction concerning the types of technology? And my second question, which is more specific, over time, there have been a lot of problems with the balancing, and there seems there is no transparency. Can we see in the foreseeable future the rate for shortage and surplus in the system? And final question, when can we expect NEC to play a more active role in the energy balancing? Of course, NEC is not the only part involved, but the rate between 25 cents and €1 is the rate for the whole of Europe. In this country, this is not the case, but perhaps there will be some decrease. Thank you, Anatoly. Let's now begin with brief and concise answer.
We're not only planning, but there have been provisions in place to regulate the joining of new capacity and the sifting, which are plausible, which aren't. And this goes hand in hand with the transformation of certain areas from one category to another, to an electrical production site. These are processes relating, linking different laws, different provisions. And we have already promulgated them, we have passed them through, but the process is longer than we would like it to be. We will try to borrow the best practices, and hopefully by the year end we will have already something available and functioning well for businesses. I think I answered your first question, but a fee or something else as a way to sift out those who are ready to invest in new installations from speculators who seek new opportunities. Both categories are fine, but this is skin in the game. And this was guarantee to SO what projects are well advanced. On the issue of legal amendments, those that we have proposed and put forward to the Energy Commission, they coincide with what you spoke about. We have already envisaged a contract for reserve capacity to be signed after the feasibility study for joining the grid. Could be solar, could be wind, 2 or 3 year contract for reserve capacity. It will hopefully provide security to potential investors that they could have their projects developed by signing this reserve capacity contract. We would like to have the necessary guarantees from investors in the form of deposits or bank guarantees that they will really execute their projects, and so that we could correspondingly develop the grid in certain regions. The grid is The grid, following an old anecdote, the grid is like the woman's heart. It's always expandable, but it can take as much as it is developed. So it's a matter of future investment in the grid. There's no problem if you want your energy to be shipped all the way from Bulgaria to Germany. Yes, we will, but we'll ship it, but you have to pay for that. In terms of balancing, in our website, you can see every 30 minutes in real time, you can see the price. Energy is one of the reforms in the recovery plan, reforming the balancing market. There are other two reforms. One is the introduction of the 15-minute interval, and the system operator can make this happen on the 1st of June. That's early, and the stock market operator is already set, and it will introduce a 15-minute trade, and also the rules have yet to be improved by the regulator for the 15-minute interval. Something else that needs to take place vis-a-vis the balancing market is to equalize the deficit and surplus prices. And equalizing these prices, leveling those prices, will contribute to a much better balancing of the market. Apart from that, you asked about the high prices on Bulgarian territory. The price of balancing energy and the system operator is responsible for it as the administrator. It is probably the lowest one in Europe. You can see the results since February. After a reform was done in the balancing groups, and the removal of their common settlement, and if the market price, I think, is about 210 euro for April, and price at the balancing market is was 140 euro for April, and for May does not come out yet. I mentioned this already. National Electric Company will live up to its duty, its key priority at the moment. Unfortunately, is the low availability, non-functioning power stations. About 30% of the power stations NEC operates, National Electric Company operates, are not available. They're undergoing rehabilitations, repairs. Some have been years late, and it's not quite clear when they will be up and running, and this reduces their active play on the market and various commitments, long and short term, etc. And my thanks to the panelists, and I wish them success in this onerous tasks to steer Bulgarian energy production and attracting robust and responsible investors.